The most important part of the drawing is the proportion, and most importantly the envelope, which contains the height and width of the subject. If this bounding envelope is wrong, you will end up with a drawing that is either too wide or too narrow, so really pay close attention to this. This cast is pretty straightforward as it is almost a perfect square. I like to add little indications that I know to be too wide or too narrow. This gives me a visual check, and it's much easier to solve a visual problem like drawing visually rather than figuring it out in your head. So by adding this value everywhere within the lights, I'm giving myself the ability to remove for the highlights later on instead of trying to work around them or saving them. This comes back to that idea of thinking in layers. So removing that top value, as these are not often the most common. In fact, the majority of subjects, the midtone tends to be the most common. So finding this nice consistent value within the lights, well, acts as a nice unifier for the whole scene. And this happens a lot where lights become patchy because there isn't a value to unify them all together. You can see though, even though I'm finding a light value, I'm still making sure that my shadow shapes remain clear. Cool, so now that the larger mass for the eye has been found, I can start to add the darks for the pupil. Again, just with one value and using the stump to blend it in. Doing it this way makes the pupil feel like it's part of the eye, and there is nice harmonious value running all the way through it. As you can see, just adding in that simple dark really creates that illusion of forms being in a sphere. Using the eraser then just to remove that small area for the light at the bottom of the pupil. As you can see now, this drawing is really starting to take shape. Most importantly, taking shape without the need for any information within the darks. In fact, look at the paintings by Rembrandt especially. You can really see how he took that to extremes, the idea of losing information in the darks, and he creates an amazing sense of depth and mystery. It's only now, almost an hour into the drawing, that I would start to develop the values within the darks. It's important to remember that the lights within the darks aren't actually that light. And by selecting the lightest value within the dark, this reflected light, we can actually see it's far darker than anything within the lights. So I've got to think to myself, if I want to make something lighter, it is far better to make everything else around it darker. This way I protect the relationships between the lights and the darks. So to find the reflected light above the eye, I start to darken the value above and below it. And quite quickly the shape of the eye within the dark starts to develop. It's really important though that there are no hard edges found within the darks. This is because hard edges are only created when form turns away from the light source. Now we are moving towards the end of the drawing. It is a good time to talk about lighting a subject matter. More importantly, natural lighting versus what we are using here, artificial lighting, along with the pros and cons of each. Artificial light is a great way of introducing the student to the fundamentals of drawing. It is the light source that many art schools favour for a student's first piece of work. There are many reasons for this. Mainly, the light shapes and shadow shapes on a subject lit with artificial light are far easier to recognise and understand visually, and allows the student to really see what is going on within the form. In this cast, the artificial light has allowed us to see how the light source illuminates the fact that the eye is a ball. As artificial light is usually much stronger than natural light, values become much simpler, as the lights are lighter and the darks are much darker, with the midtones being somewhat blown out. Meaning the act of simplifying the subject becomes a lot easier.